Welcome to a community built of tomorrow's business leaders. Hey guys, I'm William Freitas, and this is the Socius Podcast. Socius, welcome back to another episode. Today we have Natalie Yan-Chatonsky from Full-Time Lives. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, William.
Today is awesome. You know, I'm super excited to talk to you about this because you've released your new book. Yes, tell us more about that.
It was here at Work Club just last week. I launched my book, The Art of Full-Time Living, Design a Meaningful and Connected Life. And it's for women going through midlife changes, and it's filled with uplifting stories, practical guides and tips based on my research into longevity, healthy aging, and how to design a meaningful life.
And two, that is what I exactly want to talk to you about, about how, we can empower the journey of an entrepreneur at midlife to look at starting a business or, consider different elements, because I have no doubt so much comes up for them, right? But before we do, I guess tell us a little bit about the book. Tell us how the launch went. Talk more about that.
I had such a great time, and I think everyone else in the room also was buzzing from it. And I think the reason why is because this topic of women going through midlife change is so topical. Coming out of the pandemic, people are needing to feel appreciated, valued, ways of de-stressing and feeling supported. And a key way of doing it is through connections.
Yeah. And you and I were sort of talking off air about this, but the value of building a in-person connection is super valuable, right?
And I think that's exactly what we did. And that was a really important thing for me, because I thought, well, people are getting dressed up, coming all the way into the city, and they may not know anyone. So it was important that they came away feeling like not only did they learn something, but they connected with someone really deeply. So we facilitated that with bookmarks, each with a meaningful question on the back, facilitated some activities for people to connect. And once we had that, the mood just completely lifted. They arrived, they had that opportunity to meet someone new, have a really deep conversation that brought out the best in them. And then they were able to settle in and listen and laugh. And I've seen the photos from the event, and it just looks like everyone was smiling the whole night through.
Yeah, look, it was fantastic energy. And for those of the people that couldn't be, I guess, in the room, tell us a little bit about the book and what people can expect.
The book is really graphical. So that was an important aspect to me, to the book. I have a background in product management, so I do a lot of reader research, and I'd interviewed a lot of women who were going through midlife change in December 2019, and that was the beginning of me embarking on the process of narrowing my focus on midlife women. So one of the things that I kept on hearing from women is that they don't read as much nonfiction these days. And when I asked them, well, what sort of things are they engaging with? The sorts of things that they're doing in their spare time would be watching Netflix, being on Instagram, and maybe a bit of light reading, but not nearly the volume of reading that they used to do. So I thought, well, the topic that I have to say to get women to think about the bigger picture of their lives and how important it is to plan, I thought that's a real concern, that people aren't necessarily reading the information and taking on board what we already know about planning and healthy aging. So I felt there was a real need to speak and engage with women in a really easy to engage with format. And so I wanted to create a beautiful book that has been well researched, has lots of stories about inspiring women. And that was really easy for me to do. I really like interviewing people. So I was able to interview a range of different women who I found inspiring here in Australia as well as overseas. And I was able to write up their stories and stitch it in with some of the learnings that I have taken away from applying longevity and healthy aging that I've learnt, and I guess I've kind of got that main narrative that stitches it all together. So the main themes are around how to have purpose in your life, whether it's through work or other things that you're interested in, the importance of social connections, and also lifelong learning. And those are the key themes that I'm very focused on. I'm very passionate about getting women to reconnect with themselves, to discover what does that mean for them in the next few chapters of their lives.
And I want to talk to you specifically about purpose, right? Because I feel like particularly, and I guess if we dissect midlife, how would you define midlife and women in midlife?
It's a stage in life, and depending on their circumstances in terms of whether they've had children, and if they do have children, how old they had them, and then also whether they have aging parents. So it also depends on when their parents had them. So it's less about a chronological age, but more of a stage in life. And obviously we experience menopause at different ages too. So it's a combination of a few different factors that might suggest that there's a lot of changes, very big life changes that are happening that can also impact other things like their work. So sometimes people might be dialing down their parental responsibilities as they become empty nesters. But on the other hand, being in the sandwich generation, their parents might require more of their care and attention, which might require them to work part-time or have more flexible arrangements. So that shift in our roles and our relationships with others around us can often put pressure on us in the work environment. It's not necessarily something that people necessarily feel comfortable speaking about with their colleagues and their bosses. So, and the other thing is that menopause is also a taboo subject, unfortunately. And there's a lot of misunderstanding around that. So there's often a few different factors that actually make life a bit harder for women because they're going through that change. So while they're shifting and kind of trying to think about, well, what should I do next? I think it's a great opportunity to think above and beyond now and the next immediate step to a few steps ahead, like the longer term future, to be really clear about what their vision is there so that can be their North Star for what decisions they might be making in the immediate future.
Yeah, look, I very much view midlife as almost like a moment or like a fork in the road moment where you get to make a decision or a choice on where things might lead for you. And I most certainly agree with creating an image or a vision of where it is you want to be and what your life wants to look like, right?
Exactly.
In 5-10 years time potentially, and what the next step looks like for you in the right direction. And sometimes they could be, career changes and setting up your own business or whatever that might be.
I run a vision workshop where I get people to not just think about what does it look like, but also how does it feel? Who are you surrounded by? Who gives you joy? Who's actually really supportive? And there's going to be a number of different people. So that makes them think, gosh, do those sorts of people exist in my life today? If not, then how do I meet those sorts of people?
Embodying that feeling is what allows that person to imagine what they're like in that position and, reverse engineer how they're going to get there, most certainly.
And it's also really motivating if you're really clear about that life that you want to have and that feeling, because only you can know how that might feel. So being really clear about that and therefore how you articulate that to others, whether it's people you know or someone a new contact where you're just chatting about what your interests are and what your dreams are, it makes it a lot easier to put those opportunities out there.
Absolutely. And what do you think some of the challenges are? Obviously, we've mentioned some, particularly around menopause that are a bit taboo, but what are some key challenges that particularly midlife women can face or have faced when it comes to changing a career decision or setting up a business? What do you think some of the challenges out there faced with?
I'd say a big thing might be lack of confidence. And that's also linked to not necessarily investing early enough in themselves and their business idea. And that was probably my problem when I look back 5 or 6 years ago when I first started Full-Time Lives. I took a very incremental, experimental approach, which has always been my approach as a product manager. But I was probably even more timid because I guess I just wasn't sure and I didn't know if I wanted to be a business owner. It was all a bit daunting. I hadn't done it before, at least in the segment that I was focused on. And so there's a lot of self-doubt that can stop you from taking big, bold steps and actually going and talking to experts who can actually give you some guidance. So if you're having a conversation, you know, in your head and you're not actually talking to other people who actually have some expertise that they can share with you or maybe introduce you to someone who does, that gets in your way.
And when it is the unknown, it just makes it that much more scary, right? And I also feel like there are people out there who feel like they need to be perfect for when they start. You know, they need to have it all worked out when they start. And I think you're highlighting that that's not really the case.
I've come across a lot of solopreneur women recently, and they don't necessarily want to be a big tech startup entrepreneur. They've intentionally decided to drop out of their corporate roles. They've got an area of expertise where they've seen an opportunity. And what I find really interesting when I ask them, where are you at with your business? And they'll tell me about, they're in the process of designing their brand. So I feel like that's the wrong thing to be focusing on initially. It's all well and good to have some business cards, but you can always reprint them if the colors are wrong or the logo is wrong. That's the wrong problem to be solving. So if you're experimenting, I think you really should be spending more time trying to understand the segment that you want to focus on. What need are you trying to solve for them and how you can do that for them?
And getting some feedback, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, testing it, speaking to them. It just further allows you to embody who it is that you will be in the future and practicing with various different, whether it's product or service, on your target market, right?
I find that they do understand the concept of testing, but they'll be testing the logo or the company name.
Seeking external feedback that the colors and the name looks great, right?
Yeah.
And what other challenges, you know, do you see societal challenges look like? Because I feel like you know, there can be those challenges around what they expect someone to do or to deliver in a position, or even when they set up the business, where they should be, right?
Do you mean from a business point of view where they should be at as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, correct. Like almost as if, you know, if they're 6 months down the track or 12 months down the track, you know, there's the statistic that, you know, most businesses fail within the first 2 years, right? And the perception of failure or success is often skewed depending where you're at, right?
I guess especially if you're on social media and you see all your peers or these influencers who are talking about their successes and they've 10x their business in a year, and you go, oh, I want to learn how to do that. And you're downloading all their templates and you look at it and go, that's not really telling me stuff. And then you feel like, what am I missing here? So, there is a lot of social pressure to be a certain way. And I guess there's all different flavors of being a business owner or an entrepreneur. And even the word entrepreneur can be quite loaded these days because I guess people immediately imagine a tech startup that's global, and you don't have to be entrepreneurial in order to have that as your goal. You can have something that's more aligned with your value.
And it's funny you brought up social media. I feel like that can be a real restrictor for people as well, you know, wanting to position themselves or their brand or their company name and logo in a certain light. And they get quite debilitated by the process of being on social media. And I think you and I were chatting about this previously in the sense that you don't always need to have a social media presence, do you? You can really choose your own path as to how the business looks.
You just reminded me of a couple of women who I profiled in my book who talked about how they lost some friends along the way of building their startup businesses. So not all women in the book I featured were necessarily startup founders, but there were a few. And they said that some of their friends were the biggest detractors when they started their startup journey. They would tell them, oh, but at this age, why are you doing this? It's so risky. Why don't you just continue doing what you were before, because it's a known thing? And that's often a big struggle of being held back by people who are close to you and think they know you, but they don't necessarily see your potential. So I think that's really dangerous, of having people who might be weighing you down, pulling you back, and that's not helpful when you've got friends like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important when people are going through transition of any kind, to make sure you're surrounded by people who are going to support you and who you're going to grow into. And if they can see who you're going to grow into and see your potential, they're going to push you towards the right opportunities and really help you grow even when it's hard.
And look, I think too, my sort of point on that is, only you can see the vision, right? Those closest to you may not be able to see that vision. And sometimes you have to be courageous enough to take that leap, to make the decision on setting up your own business, because others may not see what you see. So I definitely agree with that aspect. I've, even in my own journey and those that are around me, I have seen those that doubt you are often the ones that you want to support you the most. But it's so much more rewarding once it's successful, right?
Absolutely. So being really careful about who you surround yourself with at those times of transition are really important.
Yeah. I also want to talk to you about long life learning, which is one of your aspects of the book, right? Which I'm a big believer of, because in business, as you know, you need to continue to upskill yourself, right? Tell us a little bit more about what you dive into that one in the book.
So upskilling, getting training, growth mindset, it all means something different for everyone.
Got it.
So this comes back to what gives you that sense of purpose and understanding that, because that will then enable you to be really clear about what would you like to learn and what do you focus on, because you can't necessarily spend, all your time and effort on all these different random learning projects, because we just don't have time for that. It's not realistic. But if you've got a really clear sense of purpose about what you want to do over the next few years or decades or stages of your life, and you feel like you've identified which areas that you're missing or not very confident in, then that's the opportunity to go and get that information to really upskill. And there's so many different ways to upskill beyond formal education. So formal education, getting a degree, diploma, getting certified, those are one way to acquire a new vocational skill or shift careers. But then there's also other ways, like getting mentors who can help you identify what are your transferable skills. So that's a really invaluable thing to know about yourself when you're going through transition, to understand what are your strengths and how they're applicable to a whole new environment that you might be potentially thinking about entering, whether you're an entrepreneur or thinking of changing careers. So two-way mentoring is a really nice way to connect with someone who you can learn from, but then also you can share your expertise with them as well, so that it's a mutually beneficial relationship that's going to be a lot longer lasting.
I like that, because I'll be honest, I haven't heard that a lot in terms of two-way mentoring. Mentoring often gets the, I guess, connotation that it is one way. Obviously, those who know mentoring, the mentor itself is always going to want an element as well. But I haven't thought of it. I mean, it's just a perspective change, isn't it? The two-way mentoring, the aspect that you can provide some serious value to the mentor and the mentee can get some value as well. So is that something you talk about a little bit more?
A lot. I was inspired by Chip Conley, who was the two-way mentor to Brian Chesky of Airbnb.
Awesome.
So Brian Chesky was in his 20s when he founded Airbnb. So he realized he had a leadership gap. So he sought out Chip Conley, who was in his 50s at the time. And Chip Conley had a long-standing track record in the hospitality industry. And so Chip thought he was being brought in to be a mentor to help Brian Chesky understand all the ins and outs of the hospitality industry. But he very quickly realized, no, it's like his Airbnb is disrupting the hospitality industry. It's not about hotels and how to, run a hotel, which was what Chip Conley had done in his successful path in his career. What he realized and has defined this concept of two-way mentoring is that actually he could learn a lot from Brian in the world of technology in his case. So he realized, given that it was a really young culture at Airbnb, that not only could he provide something in terms of understanding how to manage teams and manage change, that in turn, he was also learning about how you run a digital business and how technology was changing the way people travel. So he ended up writing a book about it that really explains and unpacks this whole concept of two-way mentoring. And so whenever people ask me if I could mentor them, I bring it up and I say, look, I'm happy to mentor. I really like mentoring young women who are entrepreneurs or product managers, but I always try and see if there's a way that they can think about, well, what is it that I can learn from them? So I can give you an example of where I've recently developed a two-way mentor relationship with someone. Probably about 18 months ago. So just before I started my book project, I got introduced to a younger female product manager through the Association of Product Management here in Australia. And we struck up a really great relationship. From day one, it was really clear that she'd come from the publishing industry. So she knew a lot about how to support authors, what authors need to do other than writing the content of their book. And so I guess that was her way of really guiding me through a phase in my career that I really needed to know what was involved in being a first-time author. And she ended up introducing me to someone who I work very closely with, who does my copywriting and SEO for all of my content and comms. So that was really helpful to have her be part of what I was doing at the time when I was still learning a lot. And at the time I was able to help her find her next job as a product manager. So I didn't necessarily find the job for her, but we were talking a lot about what she wanted in her next job. What were the important things to be looking for, and also how to be prepared. So that was a really great two-way mentor program that we struck up. We kind of had forward booked all the times in our diaries several months in advance.
On a monthly basis.
Yeah, and that was great.
I think it is right to say that a young professional seems more ambitious to develop that initially because they get more support to do so. Not that they're more ambitious in that sense, but they get more support and encouragement to develop that relationship.
Correct. There's a lot more structured programs. So whether it's their company or they belong to a professional association, then there's a lot more opportunities where they can put their hand up and say, look, I would like to either get a formal coach that I pay for or the company pays for, or I can be matched up to have someone who's got that wisdom and experience. So you're right. It's a lot easier if you're in the work environment where everyone's looking out for you and really wanting that person to do well. So when it comes to changing careers later on, and it's becoming the norm to have multiple careers over the course of a lifetime. We're living longer, our health span is longer, and we don't necessarily stay in our jobs and industry for for decades, we might be more likely to change every few years, in which case it's really important to upskill and get knowledgeable around what are the latest tools and thinking frameworks that everyone's using in that new industry that you want to join, or that new functional area that you'd like to take a sidestep into. So I don't think employers are necessarily thinking about that so much in terms of those side moves that they might be making within a business or an industry. So there's a real opportunity there for employers to be thinking differently, as well as people going and asking for it and creating those opportunities.
That's a really good point. Like even the small business community that are listening to today, how is it that you're empowering your team to continue to develop and take on that approach of lifelong learning? Do your teams have mentors? And it doesn't need to be internal all the time. It can be quite external. Yeah.
And another way of learning in a small business is like if everyone has a joint passion for reading, for example, you could do a book club. So you could do a book club on a Thursday afternoon over drinks, where you might have a different book that either one person has already read and they dissect it and share their learnings with the rest of the team.
Yeah. And I think too, I like the idea of a fiction book club in the sense that it provides individuals with an ability to escape, to experience someone else's life. That's what I like about fiction books. You can experience somebody else's story or somebody else's life and share that. And that can be a good way to switch off, right? Because I think entrepreneurship can be tough. And so what would you say, what are some other tips that you could provide to, I guess, the small business community or the midlife woman who is considering entrepreneurship but doesn't quite know where to go next?
So I'm actually part of a business coaching group, and I find that's a really good way to be in a safe place surrounded by women who are also on the journey. And I like the way it's structured. It's all remote. There's a whole lot of content and resources that I can tap into depending on the topic that I need to skill up on. And then there's also structured Q&A sessions that I can show up at, and everyone's always got interesting questions that you learn from. So even if you don't have a question that week, listening to others and what they're going through, and that can often spark some ideas in terms of what you need to be thinking about. So I wish I had that 5 or 6 years ago. I didn't even know these sorts of groups existed, but I feel like I know from a metrics point of view, over the last 2 months, I've had the best revenue months.
Amazing.
So I think a lot of that can be contributed to the fact that I joined this business coaching group about 6 months ago.
It's amazing the power of community, right?
Yeah.
Being able to bounce ideas off each other, or even feel like you're going into the meeting and you don't really have anything to get from it. But when you give a little bit, you just find that it comes back in droves, doesn't it? And that having the community behind you is what is going to support your business to grow. I definitely agree. I love the idea of setting up side groups, or groups that are not always even in your industry.
Yeah.
Getting diversified thinking into your business is super valuable.
Absolutely. And also all these women are really well connected. So sometimes there's a call out to say, oh, I need a digital manager or someone who can do graphics. Does anyone know anyone?
Yeah.
And in that group, so whether you showed up for the hot seat Q&A or it's in the private Facebook group, there's someone who's willing to help, and we all help each other.
Yeah, perfect. And so we've learned a little bit about the book, but tell us a little bit more about, I guess, Full-Time Lives and the business itself.
So I pivoted during the pandemic. So I used to be focused on that, I guess, next stage of transitioning to retirement. And I was running lots of programs, workshops, and obviously all that stopped during the pandemic. So I really had to evaluate what was I going to do with the business. And I realized actually what I kept on hearing in the workshops were the regrets that people had, that they hadn't started doing the things they really enjoyed when they were much younger. And I thought that was such a shame. And I guess I took it on myself to really act on what I was hearing and all the learnings that people were sharing with me. And I guess that really motivated me to shift gears, think about younger women, like midlife women, who are at that cusp of change, who, yes, life is hard because all these things, moving parts are changing at work, at home, in their families. Maybe their bodies and their health is also changing as well, which kind of gives that sense of urgency to do something different with their lives. So I felt really passionate about not just my friends and the people I knew, to learn about all the things I was learning and trying out myself. So I guess that really led me to pivot, focus on this segment of midlife women. So now all my workshops and programs are very much focused on women who are going through midlife change. The book is also something that accompanies all of that. And then also working with organizations who really care about this segment. So I also consult and do advisory work for businesses that have a lot of midlife women, like typically senior corporate professionals.
Got it.
And also businesses that might have them in their customer segment.
Perfect. I mean, because it sounds like, entrepreneurship seems to be the focus, but there's so much intrapreneurship that we can impact, with midlife women, or taking on the next role or taking a sideways role.
Yeah.
And that's something you help with as well.
Yeah. And I believe it's all about running short experiments in parallel, so it's not too risky. So it's not about, well, I guess we're all different, and I did it. Like, I was in a big corporate role in financial services before I did start up Full-Time Lives. I felt I needed to focus on it for a full year to really get my head around what was the customer problem I was trying to solve, and really understand that and do a lot of testing with the market. So and then over time, I then subsequently got back into doing some consulting work to supplement the income while I still focused on building out the programs and building an audience. So there's been phases of dialing up the consulting work in parallel with working on my business. And now it feels just right, because now I'm doing consulting work that is tied in with the subject matter. And this is where I'm probably best optimized, and I'm developing a reputation that is just for one thing. So that makes sense on many levels.
And I think too, we can bring it back to, you likely set a goal, or you embodied who it is that you wanted to be in 5-6 years time, and here you are now 6 years later, taking on some consulting work that relates directly with the audience that you're trying to impact, right? And I imagine it's so much more fulfilling as well.
Absolutely. So one of the other tools that's been really helpful for me to stay focused, and every decision point that I've had to make has been very much focused on who my target customer is. So when I did the reader research for my book, I created a customer persona, a reader. And it's a one page that identifies all the traits about my typical reader for my book, or who Full-Time Lives is supporting. And I've saved her persona to my desktop. So every time I log onto my computer, I see Jen's face, and I am reminded by her pain points and the things that she's trying to achieve in her life, but is really struggling with. So when I have to think about where am I going to spend my time, I look at Jen and I think, is this going to somehow make a positive difference for Jen? If it's not, then maybe it's a lower priority, and I've got to question, why am I doing it? Is it out of habit, or is it just wanting to be liked, or trying to get along with someone? It was just not the right reason from a business point of view, and also how I use my energy. So this has been a really good way for me to be a lot more focused, and just on a micro level in terms of what tasks do I have, which ones are going to make the biggest difference to my reader persona, Jen.
Awesome. And energetically, do you notice a difference when maybe it's a day that you're having an off day, or you don't feel like you're, up to the challenge, but when you look at Jen, do you notice an energetic difference? Because that is your target market. That is who you're impacting.
Yeah, I find that it fuels me because I meet a lot of gens every day. So whenever I see someone who either gives me feedback because of something that I've done, whether it's through my workshop or the book that she's read, and she may not have finished reading the book, but if she's made some small difference to her life, that's the beginning, because the hardest part is making change. And the biggest intention for my book was actually, I just wanted to give people a starting point to think about it, not be overwhelmed, do something different. And so it gives me like great satisfaction to know that the work that I'm doing is now making people take that first step forward.
And I have no doubt that there is more gens listening to this conversation, and they may want to buy the book and reach out. So tell us how they can reach out and how they can find your book and where.
The best place to go is my website, which is fulltimelives.com. And the book is available there. And to also stay in touch with me, I suggest sign up to the newsletter on the webpage, and I send regular updates for business owners as well as for the individuals. And the content's different, so they can sign up to both.
And then also there's LinkedIn and whatever else that they can contact.
Yeah.
Perfect. Natalie, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think it's definitely an element that we wanted to shine a light on in terms of how difficult it can be, or the challenges that can arise in midlife when considering entrepreneurship or considering even intrapreneurship, making a change. And so I think there are so many valuable points that you've mentioned today, and I think there are so many more valuable points in your book that I'm keen to see, and I'm keen for the audience to read. So thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate you coming on, and we look forward to seeing more of you.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, and it's been lovely chatting with you, William.
Thank you.
Socius, thank you for joining us today. Please hit the subscribe button if you've enjoyed this episode. And if you'd like to be part of the Socius community, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay in touch. Cheers.